Welcome to Mechanic Design 101, where we go over the history of a common mechanic in Fire Emblem and discuss how it shaped and was shaped by the series. Whether you're interested in strategy RPG design or just want to learn more about Fire Emblem's history, this resource is for you. This week, we're unpacking the weapon framework of Fire Emblem, seeing how the series fits interesting upgrades and side grades into the basic structure, and considering what room is left for more unique weapon ideas. As a quick note, we will primarily be talking about physical weapons in this video. I've already made a whole video on the history of magic in Fire Emblem, so check that out if you're interested. The framework of iron, steel, and silver weapons is as old as the series itself. While not every weapon had a full spread, swords had all three in Fire Emblem 1 and set a baseline for what the various materials would be going forward. Iron was cheap, durable, light, and weak. Steel was a bit more expensive, middling durability, a bit stronger, but much heavier. Silver was expensive, took a high weapon level, had the lowest durability, was between iron and steel in weight and accuracy, and had the highest damage. The exact numbers vary, but for the majority of games, steel weapons are about 3 might stronger than iron of the same type, while silver ranges between 3 and 5 might higher than steel. These are significant jumps in power, and helped make weapon level a relevant stat from the very beginning, though steps of 3 to 5 points of might are also big enough to put some other weapons in between them. Side grades to the core structure also existed from the very beginning. Common concepts included adding 1 point of range, the cost of all other stats, like javelins, adding crit while reducing durability and increasing price and rarity, like killing edges, adding effectiveness against a particular unit type at the cost of most other stats and rarity, like hammers, or replacing the physical attack with a magical spell, like the Levin Sword. Physical 1-2 range weapons are largely reserved for lances and axes, with the occasional 2-3 range longbow for bows, while magical weapons were primarily swords, although later entries did introduce more non-sword magical weapons. Effective weapons and critical weapons appear on all weapon types, though armor effect is more common on swords and axes, while cavalry effect was more common on lances. Brave effect weapons, or weapons that hit twice per round of combat, were first introduced in Fire Emblem 4 with Finn's titular Brave Lance, and became more common and less exclusive over time. In most games, there are only 1 or 2 brave weapons of each type accessible to the player, with significantly less might than silver weapons and high weapon level requirements. Another fairly common weapon type introduced in Fire Emblem 3 is the slim weapon, with significantly reduced weight and increased accuracy, often at the cost of a large portion of might, even below iron. Slim lances have existed across most of the series, while slim swords have seen fewer entries, and slim axes and bows are largely non-existent. Engage featured slim weapons of all types, but these share overlap more with bronze weapons that were introduced in Radiant Dawn. Legendary weapons often exist at the top, above all other weapons of their class. Often these come with stat increases or other special effects, but their high raw power alone makes them worth using, even if they often appear only towards the end of the game and at max weapon rank. In a controversial attempt to further expand the weapon ranks, Radiant Dawn introduced bronze weapons, cheaper and weaker than iron with an inability to crit. This crit restriction only existed in Radiant Dawn and in Fates. Fates, in turn, added a bonus to dodge or crit avoid, which is then shared with Engage's slim weapons. The addition of bronze weapons in Radiant Dawn was controversial because it pushed all other weapons further up in required rank. While deserving of its own video, the topic of weapon ranks is critical to understanding the weapon structure of Fire Emblem, so let's talk about that. In Fire Emblem 1 and Fire Emblem 3, weapon level was a stat that leveled up like other stats, and was used to determine if a unit could wield any given weapon of a type that their class could use. Iron had the lowest requirements, silver had the highest, and everything else fell between the two. From Fire Emblem 4 onward, weapon level was retired as a stat, and instead the lettered weapon rank system replaced it. Now, you needed a certain letter rank to wield any particular weapon. In Genealogy and Engage, the rank was locked to the unit and increased only on promotion, but from Thracia through 3 houses, the rank would increase with use of weapons of that type. This weapon rank system really did solidify the Iron Steel Silver framework Fire Emblem is known for. In games without bronze weapons, the structure largely finds iron weapons at E rank, steel and javelins at D, killer and effective weapons at C, brave weapons at B, silver at A, and legendary weapons at S. Shadow Dragon DS and beyond began seeing silver weapons reduced to B rank and sometimes put legendary weapons at A, while Awakening used this reduction in silver weapon rank to move brave weapons above them to A, and brave has been equal to or higher than silver in rank ever since. Steel axes, hand axes, and javelins broke this structure in the GBA games and Path of Radiance, existing at E rank instead of D, but they were moved back up to match in Radiant Dawn and haven't been back to E since. I mentioned earlier that bronze weapons pushed everything up by a rank, but this mostly applied to iron and steel weapons, as can be seen in Radiant Dawn, Awakening, Fates, and Engage. Javelins and hand axes in these games share a rank with iron weapons and not steel, allowing units to use ranged options at D instead of C. The increasing weapon rank system works because it is largely intuitive and provides both short-term goals and different ways to differentiate units. Consider Board, Cord, and Barst in Shadow Dragon DS. All of these units offer something different, despite all being fighters that join on the same map. Barst has great stats and growths. Cord has an interesting personal growth spread that makes him better as different classes. And Board has a higher axe rank that lets him use effective weapons at base. With static weapon ranks, Board would have nothing to set himself apart positively from either Cord or Barst. And in terms of short-term goals, Fire Emblem is full of them. This is another topic worth its own video, but the weapon rank system provides an extra reason to change how you play in order to reach a goal. Instead of just leveling up or beating chapters, you also now need to consider the weapons your units are using beyond just weapon triangle. If you want to gain enough ranks to use a hammer, for instance, you'll need to go out of your way to use axes regularly enough to level up that rank, even if your unit is better in swords or in lances. So, that's the broad framework of Fire Emblem weapons. Let's talk about the system's strengths and weaknesses, something I've heard a lot about in discussion recently. The strengths of the framework are its predictable power curve, the increased value and importance of upgrading your gear, and the way the system interacts with key weapon features like stats, effects, and durability. By unlocking stronger weapons over time, units get to have large jumps in power potential as they fight, in addition to the steady improvement of leveling up and the large jumps of promotion. By limiting stronger weapons to higher ranks, the game can afford to give you a small number of high-rank weapons early on, like Jagen's traditional Silver Lance, without worrying that all your other units would be able to use that power boost to break the early game. By making stronger weapons have lower durability, they become carefully rationed emergency tools rather than a permanent upgrade as soon as the unit reaches that rank, which also allows the game the freedom to give you one or two early on without worrying about making everything else too easy. By having stronger weapons without special effects, the game keeps calculations simplified to the core attributes of units while still giving advantages for leveling weapon ranks and spending resources by using stronger weapons. Games without some of these considerations need to compensate by adjusting how they treat stronger weapons. Games without durability, or with static weapon ranks for instance, generally cannot give you a silver weapon from the very beginning, or they risk invalidating all lower rank weapons. They also need to carefully consider how to rebalance silver weapons so they aren't just better in every situation once you do get them, such as post-battle debuffs and fates, or the significantly higher weight of Engage. While critics of having several different weapons without special effects may say they waste armory space for potentially more interesting weapon designs, you can still do a lot to differentiate weapons solely based on their stats. For a good example, look at anima magic in the GBA games. Fire is light and accurate, Thunder is well-rounded with a slight crit chance, Hellfire is slower but much more powerful, and Fimbulvetter is very slow but very strong. Despite only changing base stats, the way these spells feel is very different. You rarely would expect to double with Hellfire, for instance, but you do expect to double and hit with Fire. Having a base of simpler weapons is also important to avoid cognitive overload. Games like Fates and Engage have so many moving pieces, so many different ways to gain advantages, so many calculations and skills or emblems to keep track of, that many players may find these games exhausting to play. The simple weapon framework helps alleviate this overload, giving players one less thing to worry about while still allowing them some choice and control over their weapon selection. That is not to say that the framework is perfect. As stated above, taking up so many slots with basic weapons can indeed limit the more creative options available. GBA Dark Magic functions well without a strict framework, as although the use cases for Luna and Nosferatu are limited, the versatility of Flux is sufficient to get you through most combats, although many players have still wanted additions beyond the few that Shamans had available to them. The framework can also make units feel more homogeneous if it's followed too strictly. The introduction of the base, L, Arc, Advanced, Tome framework has standardized spells in a similar way to Iron, Steel, and Silver for physical weapons, but without the extra options of the framework like higher range, crit, or type effectiveness, the structure itself feels stifling. Engage might have done better by introducing Surge, making all Thunder spells 1-3 range, and giving all Wind spells Flyer effectiveness, but by sticking these attributes onto every weapon in the structure, whilst insisting on keeping the structure for every element, it removes much of the excitement of any given weapon tier. Without the extra options physical weapons have, like Smash or broader effectiveness, spells again got reduced solely to stat modulation with basically nothing to look forward to. It doesn't help that weapon ranks in Engage are static, and there's no durability, meaning you generally would pick 1 or 2 weapons to equip on any unit, and then just upgrade them over the course of the game, instead of constantly switching them out. That said, another critique of the weapon framework is the need to constantly manage and replace your weapons. Ever since Breath of the Wild, durability has been something of a dirty word to gamers. If any limit of usage exists, some players will push against it no matter what. As discussed previously, the Fire Emblem weapon framework was built around durability as a key aspect. Trying to keep the framework without durability makes the framework feel like little more than a linear upgrade system, and players who are investing into upgrading their existing weapons will usually want to keep their basic weapons and invest into something else more interesting, rather than invest into basic weapons over and over again. For players who dislike durability, then, the weapon framework represents a tedious process of inventory management, upgrades, and replacements. Some players have suggested the idea of having basic weapons like iron or training weapons be infinite use to stave off the fear of being softlocked for overconsumption. However, the risk of this is that hoarding mentality would only worsen, and players who seldom use powerful weapons like Silver's would stop using them altogether in favor of the ease of infinite use basic weapons. For a more interesting example of how to use weapons without durability, consider Shadows of Valentia. Durability there does not exist, but instead, every weapon is a unique item found along your journey. These weapons get forged and upgraded into either framework upgrades or niche side grades and stay with you for the whole game. The system has some issues in its implementation. Certain weapons are so much stronger than others that it feels wasteful to invest in anything else, you cannot revert weapons for most paths if you change your mind, and you aren't allowed to see what a weapon's full upgrade path is without outside resources. But the core system demonstrates that you can carve out a new system that does not use most of the existing framework and still have it work well. Just be sure to invest fully into the strengths of your decisions, instead of just trying to fix perceived issues while ignoring the inherent interdependence of systems within the framework. So that was quite a bit. Let's wrap it up. The Iron, Steel, Silver framework relies on all of its parts to be fun and interesting. This includes ranks, durability, side grades, and weapon availability. Trimming anything away from the framework makes it less interesting and more tedious and frustrating. Focus on the cohesiveness of your system. If you want to take out durability or weapon ranks, consider moving away from the framework altogether instead of just stringing it along, as it will only imprison your players instead of inspiring them. And with that, this lesson is complete. Let me know your questions in the comments below. If there are enough of them, I might make a follow-up. A huge shout out to the YouTube members who help support Design 101. That includes Royal Lagoosguard members The Forgotten L and Minirop, and Lagoosguard members C2 Peekly, Enigmatic Mr. L, Mad Moke, Bro Duderman, Kumi, Miss Mesmerism, Drumstep 913, Relaz 6, and Merlinin. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.